Here's a very simple example of how GPT works. I've called it Ronin GPT, and quite simply, it takes in a number of words, in this case, up to 5, 6, 7, 8. So Ronin GPT takes in up to 8 words, and it will predict the next word. So here's an example of how you might use Ronin GPT. You would start off by putting in some words here. Let's just say Mary had a. And now Ronin GPT predicts the next word. So here it's going to be little. Now, as a next step, the way GPT works is we'll take the output from the model and the input that you gave. So originally you gave Mary had a, it predicted little. So GPT will now take these 4 words and input them again. And now Ronin GPT is going to predict the next word here, which will be lamb. And now GPT takes this output and will input this to a next line. So let's add that down here. So Mary had a little lamb. And the next is going to be a full stop. So that's what Ronin GPT predicts. Now let's continue on our journey here. Just going to add in some more rows. So we have this. We'll do a few at a time. So copy this. All right, so now GPT again is going to predict here. So the next line is going to be, next word is going to be her. Now GPT will take all of that, put it back into the model again, and predict the next word, which is fleece. And take all of this here again. And the next word prediction will be was. So you can see that by feeding in first 3 words, you can get the next word from GPT. And then you can take those 4 words and feed it in and predict the next word. So this is how a predictive model works. It just keeps predicting the next word. And the obvious problem, in fact, let me just make all of this white for clarity, or transparent, because these are the words that are being predicted each time. The obvious problem is that now when we try to feed the next line in, let's just try and do that. GPT is only configured to accept a total of 9 words. So 8 words input and 1 word output here. So now if I copy this across, sorry, I should have copied it here. You can see that GPT is no longer going to see this first word, Mary. And it's just going to see an input of had a little lamb, her fleece was. And so in predicting this next word, GPT is not going to have any context of this word, Mary. Now, GPT might still have a good guess because this phrase might appear a lot on the internet and guess that this kind of rhyme is still going to result in the word white being guessed. But the accuracy of this word white is not going to be quite as good because this first word here is going to be lost. And this is a really simple toy example. It just shows you how with Ronin GPT is limited to a total of 9 words, maximum of input plus output. But with actual GPT, if you look at some of the models available, so say if you look at OpenAI and you look at GPT 3.5 Turbo, which is the main model that they offer for free, it has a context limit that probably will limit you to about 3,000 words. Now, if you look at GPT-4, it's limited to maybe about 6,000 words, or maybe times 4 if you can get access to a special research version. If you look at some other models like Anthropic, there's a limit of about 100,000 characters, so maybe something like 75,000 words. And what's important here is that if you're limited by words, you have to be careful that you don't put in any input that's much longer than what the context length is, because once you go beyond it, GPT is going to start losing context and not having access to the earlier information that you put in. Now let's expand a little on this example, because here what I've done is if I've put in 3 words, I've always just predicted the most likely word, but that's not exactly what GPT will do. And let's just take an example. So I'll copy this line here and I'm going to paste it in. So what GPT does is actually not just provide one possible word, but provide many words here. So there could be little, there could be big, there could be tall, and GPT will provide a probability of that being the next word. So for example, it could be 50%, 25%, and 25%. So GPT thinks that little is the most likely word. Now, if you take the simplest approach, you'll just select the most common word here, the most probable word here, and you'll continue as we did and iterate through the example. The problem with that is if you want to generate a story with GPT, it becomes very repetitive. It often will get stuck and it might start to repeat the similar text multiple times. And so in order to make it a bit more variable in terms of the words that it predicts, what you can do is instead you can sample from the possibilities. So sometimes what you'd say is that we're going to select little with a 50% chance, big with a 25%, and tall with a 25% chance. And what this means is that the output is a bit more variable, but it also doesn't repeat as much. Now, what's good is that the output doesn't repeat as much, but what's bad is GPT, when you raise, this is called raising the temperature or the variability of the output, it will start to make things up more. And so if you want a very accurate summary of something, you probably want a low temperature because you always want it to pick the most likely word it thinks is next. Whereas if you want to generate a poem or a story or something a bit more variable, then you perhaps want to increase the temperature so that it doesn't get stuck and it doesn't start to repeat. So let's go back and take a look at our agenda here. We've talked about the length limits. And we've talked a little bit about temperature, just in brief. You want to have low temperature for summarizing. And you want to have a higher temperature or variability for, say, poems or stories. Okay, so let's dive in and have a look at ChatGPT. So you can access ChatGPT in most countries. You have to create an account and you should get free access to GPT 3.5 if it's the service is available and not too busy. So ChatGPT, as I mentioned, it's able to handle maybe around 3,000 words of input. So let's just head over to Wikipedia and find some kind of an article. So we go to English and let's see if we can find some kind of article here. So let's just take some of the text here and let's actually I want kind of a long article. Let's just go with this here. Yeah, this is good. Okay. So let's ask it to provide a summary of the following. So here, basically the words that we've provided are shorter than the 3,000 words roughly. And so GPT is able to provide a summary here of what we're talking about. And this is probably a reasonable summary. It is possible there's some inaccuracies because when you operate in chat mode, the temperature is not 0. So there is going to be some variability in selecting the next word. So for example, sometimes the second or third word might be picked, and that can result in errors in the summary. But as you can see, we didn't have a problem with the length. Now here I'm going to ask another question. ChatGPT will still consider this as having input. So you can think of this as when I ask a follow-on question, what's happening in the background is all of this information is being fed. It's being fed into the left-hand side here. And then my further question is being added. So say you can think of this as everything that has already been outputted in the chat. And now I'm going to append on a question. So my question is going to have access to all of this information is the way to think about it. So here I'm going to say, tell me about one particularly interesting bird. All right. So we're getting a summary here of one particularly interesting bird. All right. Now here comes one of my recommendations. If you keep asking questions in this same chat, what's going to happen is ChatGPT is going to start losing access to the earlier part. And so increasingly it's going to diverge. It's the same with coding. If you ask it to help you code, you've inputted some text here. If you keep using the same chat, you're just going to eventually lose the earlier part, and GPT will start to make mistakes. So a better approach is you might, for every question, want to just start again. So copy all of this, put it back in to a new chat here, just copy paste, and start asking it the questions again. Or another thing I do sometimes is I will look at the question that I currently have, and instead of asking another question, what I'll do is I'll say, tell me something about one of the biggest birds. So what this does is erase the current answer. I don't know if it'll find the biggest bird. Oh, here we go. Now, of course, this is going to draw not just on the previous answer, but it's going to probably draw from its general knowledge too. So yeah, here it is pulling from the list that we provided from Wikipedia. So the key point here is just rather than keep on making your chat really long, it's better practice if you just start a new chat, or instead if you rewrite over one of your answers so that you're not losing the earliest part of the chat that you have here. All right. Okay, so we're here in Google Bard, and the difference with Bard is I can actually query things on the internet. So I could say, tell me about the front page news of the Irish Times website. Bard also, you'll notice, doesn't continuously produce text. So here is a summary of the website on June 12th. So it looks like it's giving us a few of the key points, and it's giving us some additional information here. Now, again, with Bard, I don't know the exact context length. I think it's maybe 6,000 words. And it also likely has a temperature that's not 0. So by default, as a chat model, this is probably going to make some errors in summarization or in reading the web, just because the temperature is not 0. So it's going to be randomly picking from the next token. So just things to watch out with. But generally, if you're in the US, Google Bard is a good option. Not available yet in Europe, but hopefully will be soon. So that's Google Bard. And the next thing I want to cover here is how to ask questions of a document. So let me explain a little on how you can research a document and ask questions. For that, I'm going to use ChatGPT. Now, you do need to have a premium plan here to go to GPT-4, and then you will need to go to the plugins. When you have the plugins enabled, you can select the plugin from the plugin store. I've installed Ask Your PDF. I then asked, how do I use Ask Your PDF? And it says, provide a PDF URL or document ID. And when you provide a document, which I did from Google Drive, it's then going to upload my document, and I'll now be able to ask questions of the document. And yeah, to use this, it's 20 euros or dollars per month in order to access the premium GPT, which has plugins. So it's not the plugins you pay for, but it's in order to use the plugins, you have to have the premium GPT. Just one note I forgot about, actually. If you are doing coding tasks, it is a big benefit. One of the big benefits for me, I actually would use GPT 3.5 a lot more, but the context length is double for GPT-4. So as I mentioned, you can only do about 3,000 words with GPT 3.5, but you can do 6,000 with GPT-4. And that's really valuable because it means that I can do more detailed tasks in the one chat without it forgetting about the earlier parts. So for me, that's a really big, valuable piece of GPT-4 versus 3.5. In addition to being more accurate, it just allows me to do longer research. So sorry, getting back to the PDF answering. I've got the PDF uploaded, and just to explain what it does in the background, let's just create a tab here, and let's talk about researching PDFs. So for researching PDFs. Let's just increase the font here so that we can see. So there's basically two things that happen. The first is that you upload your document and it's broken into pieces. The question is used to retrieve relevant pieces. Now that's done using a semantic search. Basically, it will look at what the meaning of the different pieces of the document are, and it will find pieces that have similar meaning to the question that you're asking. And then there's actually a third part here where those pieces are fed into GPT along with the question to generate an answer. Now, why do this? The reason is simply because a document is so long, you cannot input it into GPT because of the limit on the length. So if you have a document that's 50,000 words, you're not going to fit it into the limit of 3,000 or 6,000. So instead, you have to find the relevant pieces by doing semantic search, and then you put it into GPT using those relevant pieces. So that should be what happens here. So here I'm going to say, what are some of the benefits of the LLM cycle in document? You know, if I need to do this, I could maybe just ask, but let's just do it. It's using Ask My PDF or Ask Your PDF, even though it's my PDF. So hopefully this will work. Okay, so yeah, when it said used, that presumably means it's retrieved the relevant portions. And it's now giving me out some summary of the document. This is particularly useful if you had maybe API documents where you want to quickly get guidance on how to use the API. You could either copy paste the API or you could upload a download of the API and then you can query it. So here you can see it's pulling out the relevant parts and then it's giving me a summary. Now, a different thing to do is here when we ask questions, we can also ask it for a summary actually. Provide a one-page summary. Well, let's just say 1,000 word summary of the LLM cycle paper, please. Let's see if this works now. Okay, it's good, it's using. Now, here's the problem, because if you're trying to ask a summary, it's going to try find the relevant pieces to a summary, which is not particularly clearly defined. So it's hard to know exactly what pieces you should get from a longer document in order to generate the summary. Like, why wouldn't you need to read the whole document in order to get a proper summary? And so that's one of the inherent limitations of getting a summary in this way. Okay, so we hit an error in generating the response, but broadly you can get the picture. It seems like it's generating quite a few words, which is good. It has quite a few more to generate. Of course, you could ask it to be a bit more tidy, so something like structure your summary as a title. Let's just say in HTML format with a title, 3 bullet points, and then section. So we won't wait for the whole thing, but hopefully it'll. Okay, so it's asking ask your PDF again. Okay. So it's giving me the literal H2 HTML. And this is nice. Okay, this is nice, yeah. An introduction. So we'll come back to this. And that's pretty much the explanation of how Ask Your PDF and similar technologies work. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, one of the key things about these different models, so we talked about the OpenAI, GPT Turbo, GPT-4, which has a context length of about 32,000 tokens. So a token, actually the way that GPT works is it breaks up words into subwords, so short words like WOR, or maybe words is actually just one subtoken, but hello might be hell and then oh. And so there are 32,000 there's 32 subtokens. That's the length that's allowed, which corresponds roughly to maybe about 26,000 words. So maybe a bit more than 4 times. This is for the research model. Now, the biggest model today that I'm aware of is Anthropic, which allows for 100,000 subtokens, about 75,000 words. And that's the model that's used for Summarize Me. So in Summarize Me, rather than actually picking out the relevant pieces of the text that are relevant for the summary, it's possible to just absorb the entire text. And with the entire text absorbed, we can then just directly generate a summary. And it's not going to miss any parts. So that's a benefit. The other benefit with Summarize Me is that it's possible, because I've custom built the backend, is I can set the temperature to 0. So I know when I'm generating summary that every single time I'm going to pick the most likely word. So if we go to the temperature view here, I'm always picking the most likely word. So there's the least likelihood of hallucination. If there is something that the model doesn't know, then it should just say it doesn't know it, because it's always picking the most likely word. Now, there's not a guarantee it won't make mistakes, but certainly lowering the temperature is going to reduce the variance of what it gives out. So I've gone ahead here. I'm just running locally so that I can log in. And I am on the Pro plan, so I can summarize up to 60,000 words. Now, because we're using Anthropic, we could probably summarize up to 75,000, but you need to leave some space for the output, because it's the total that has to be less. If you remember from Ronan GPT here, the total length needs to be less than the model's context length, which is 9 here. But for Anthropic, it's 100,000 tokens, or about 75,000. So anyway, my word limit is 60,000. I've got some space then for providing a summary between 60,000 and 75,000. Probably a bit too much space, but that's okay. So here, let's try and summarize a PDF, and we're going to go for a long summary. All right, so that's going to summarize. And as I said before, this is not pulling out portions. It's literally absorbing the full text document, and then it's going to generate a summary on that basis. And I've provided prompts in the background to give some structure to the summary, so that it'll be broken down into the introduction and the bullet points. And I've also set the temperature to 0. So here is the summary. I didn't actually even speed up things there. We've got a demonstration of the LLM cycle, provides a summary. We have some bullet points here. We've got an introduction, a demonstration plan, commercialization, core tech, and conclusion. So yeah, this is how it works. It doesn't absorb the PDF per se and break it into pieces. It instead just absorbs the PDF and then will convert that into a summary. Now you can optionally download the PDF if you want, and you can save it or read it for later. The other features here, if you want to summarize a website, so again, like Google Bard, you can summarize a website, but here we've set the temperature to 0 for the summarization task, so it should be a little bit more accurate. You can also generate longer summaries and take in input from longer websites. You can also directly summarize a public link to a PDF. So if you have a PDF in Google Drive, like this PDF here, you could just share that PDF. And if you've made the link public, so anyone with the link, once you copy that link and put it into the Summarize Me website, you'll be able to get access to a summary of that PDF. All right, so I think that summarizes everything for today. The 2 key concepts to keep an eye on are the length limits. I've given some tips around using new chats or asking a question over a previous question so you don't hit into the length limit. Temperature, just beware that by default, the chat models will not have 0 temperature because that they don't want the information to be too repetitive, but that comes at the trade-off of some accuracy. And I've gone through how to use ChatGPT, Bard, how to ask questions of a document, and last of all, some of the key questions to think about with summaries. If you have any questions, you can let me know in the comments or email me, ronan@summarizeme.com. Cheers.